My name is Ava Morgan, and the night my father humiliated me in front of 100 officers, I didn't flinch. I smiled, nodded, even raised my glass like it was any other toast. But inside, something cracked so cleanly it felt like silence. The ballroom was pure ceremony. Crystal chandeliers, silver badges, a string quartet playing something polished and forgettable. People moved in tight uniforms and tighter smiles, clinking glasses, trading war stories they'd already told a dozen times. My father stood at the center of it all, like a statue carved out of discipline and ego. He held his glass high, letting the lights catch every stripe and medal on his chest. "To those who carried the Morgan name with honor," he said. His voice echoed off the marble. Then he looked straight at me. "And to Ava," he added, tone soft but cutting, "who proves that not everyone is meant to fly, but someone has to keep the spreadsheets warm." Laughter. Not loud, but sharp, polite. The kind of laughter people use when they don't want to lose their place in the room. I didn't blink. Years in flight simulations taught me how to stay steady through turbulence. I kept my smile small and my posture perfect. Then, from my left, Liam leaned in. My father's golden student. The heir. His voice was barely a whisper. "They still talk about you, Phantom." He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared ahead like it was nothing. But the words landed like an open parachute. I froze. My breath caught. Not from shame, but from memory. 6 minutes off radar. Silence in the sky. A flight no one was supposed to remember. A pilot no one ever credited. But someone had. Someone remembered. The weight of what my father erased didn't vanish. But in that moment, it shifted. The applause, the medals, the glass in his hand, all of it lost some shine. I sat in that room of clinking forks and shining shoes, letting the lies stretch between us like an empty runway. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. Truth doesn't always arrive in noise. Sometimes it slips in quietly. A whisper at the edge of a toast. A name they weren't supposed to know. My father, Colonel James Morgan, believed in two things more than anything else: discipline and legacy. He wore his uniform like armor, never a wrinkle, never a button out of place. His words were sharp, his expectations sharper. And he treated honor like a currency, only he knew how to spend. To the world, he was a hero. Decorated, precise, respected by generals and feared by cadets. At home, he was something colder. Rules replaced warmth. Silence replaced comfort. Meals were scheduled like briefings. Praise was rationed. Mistakes weren't corrected. They were punished. He used to say that legacy was built, not given. But that wasn't true. He handed it to Liam like an heirloom. Liam, who had the right face, the right voice, the right stride. Everything about him mirrored the version of perfection my father built his name around. I used to watch them from the hallway, talking shop like co-pilots. I'd walk in and suddenly the room would quiet, like I was a reminder of something off script. Liam could crash a drone and still get a pat on the back. I could write flawless code or break a simulation record and get told to stay in my lane. My lane was always behind the curtain, beneath the radar, never at the podium. When I was younger, I tried harder. I kept my boots cleaner, my reports tighter. I read every Air Force manual cover to cover, memorized flight formations like scripture. None of it mattered. My victories were invisible, and my failures were public. My father said it wasn't personal. It was about the standard. But the standard only seemed to apply to me. He called our names sacred. The Morgan line doesn't break, he'd say. But what he meant was, don't make him look bad. Legacy wasn't about truth. It was about optics. And if my story didn't fit his image of honor, it had to be rewritten or erased. He didn't just erase the files. He erased moments, conversations, credits, years. And when I tried to confront him, he'd say I misunderstood. I was too emotional, that I lacked perspective. That word again, perspective. As if objectivity meant pretending it didn't hurt. Sometimes I wondered if I would have been treated differently if I'd been more like Liam. Straighter posture, louder voice, fewer questions. But then I remember how my father talks about control like it's a virtue, and how Liam learned early to smile and say what was expected. I didn't want to become a version of someone else's ideal. I wanted to fly, not for medals or speeches, just for the quiet truth of it. The weightlessness of being exactly where I was meant to be. Up there, no one measured my value by legacy, only by whether I could keep the plane in the air. And I could, even when no one clapped when I landed. Even when my name wasn't listed. Even when my own father looked right through me. I grew up in a house where silence meant discipline, and perfection meant love. The floors gleamed like inspection day, beds were tight enough to bounce a coin, and every shoe faced exactly 45 degrees. Dinner was at 1,800 sharp, not a minute early, not a second late. My father ran our home like a command post. He expected obedience without explanation. Every morning, we made our beds, tucked corners, and stood straight for inspection, not because we wanted to, but because that's what earned a nod from him. I used to think that if I could just hit all the marks, he'd notice me. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Good work, Ava." I memorized procedures before I could tie my own shoes, recited Air Force acronyms like prayers, and kept my room like a barracks. But the rules never came with warmth. Praise wasn't something you got. It was something you earned, and even then, only if you performed flawlessly. One mistake, one misplaced fork at dinner, and I'd hear about it in a tone colder than any punishment. I didn't understand back then that his standards weren't about love, they were about control. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I asked questions, I was difficult. So I stopped crying. I stopped asking. Eventually, I learned how to hold my breath emotionally, how to take up less space, how to earn my place with silence and precision. The loneliness didn't come from being alone. It came from being unseen. There were nights I'd lie in bed listening for his footsteps, hoping they'd stop at my door, just to say goodnight, just to check in. They never did. I learned to fall asleep anyway, flat-backed, hands by my sides, just like he taught me. I tore my knee during my sophomore track season. One slip, one wrong step on the final curve, and everything I had trained for collapsed. The doctors said I needed rest, but my father called it an excuse. He didn't see an injury. He saw weakness. Every morning after that, he made me run laps around the base, while he timed me with his old flight stopwatch. No matter how swollen my knee got, no matter how much I limped, I ran. He charted my meals, logged my weight, and made notes like I was a failing mission. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, sweaty and breathless, wondering what was broken in me besides the joint. He never said he was disappointed. He didn't have to. That summer, something shifted. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It wrapped around me like heat. So I stopped chasing his approval. I got quiet. I got curious. One day, while helping catalog base supplies, I stumbled across a simulator in a dusty corner of the tech hangar. It wasn't locked. No one watched. So I sat down and flew. Something clicked. Not just the controls, but me. I was steady, focused. I didn't overcorrect. I didn't panic. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to stay in the air. I found a civilian flight club online and enrolled under a different name. I saved every dollar from tutoring and odd jobs. I studied late, trained early. And when I flew solo for the first time, I didn't think about who wasn't watching. I just listened to the sound of the wind over the wings. That flight didn't erase the shame. But it gave me something shame couldn't touch. Lift, control, and for the first time, choice. The morning of the test flight, the sky over Nellis was clean and wide. The desert air shimmered around the runway like it was holding its breath. I climbed into the Spectre X cockpit with my checklist memorized, my heartbeat slow, steady, trained. This wasn't like anything I'd flown before. The controls were hypersensitive, light under my fingers, like muscle memory that hadn't been formed yet. Once I lifted off, the world below dropped away fast. like a curtain pulling back. 10 minutes in, I hit altitude, leveled out, and ran the maneuver sequence. Everything held. No turbulence, no alerts. Then came the static. First in my headset, then on the radar. No ping, no tower, no horizon. Just sky and the deep, vibrating quiet that shouldn't exist at that height. I didn't panic. I checked diagnostics, recalibrated the nav input, and dropped altitude by 5%. Nothing. It felt like flying through a void. A strange calm took over, like I was the only thing moving in a world that had stopped. I tracked time by instinct. 6 minutes. Long enough for search protocols. Long enough to imagine the headlines if it went wrong. I eased the throttle, rolled slightly left, and locked in a manual return path. When the base reappeared on my scope, I didn't celebrate. I exhaled. The landing was smooth, one clean line on the tarmac. No fanfare. Just the heavy silence of the ground crew waiting with questions. I wrote the incident report myself. Charts. Timestamps. Radar loops. The aircraft had disappeared from all systems, full stealth achieved, accidental perfection. I thought it was a breakthrough, the kind they make documentaries about. I saved the original logs, encrypted everything, and labeled it with a private tag, Echo Protocol. I thought they'd be impressed. I thought my father would look at the data and finally see what I'd become, but I should have known better. Some flights don't get written into the record. Some flights are meant to vanish. 2 days after the flight, I was called into a briefing room. My father sat at the head of the table, a thick report folder in front of him. He slid it across the table without looking at me. I opened it and felt my breath catch. The logs were cleaned. The 6-minute blackout was marked as a simulation. The pilot is listed as test automation, no human input. He said it was a glitch. The data had scrambled mid-flight, and the incident couldn't be verified. He told me the entire event would be classified to protect system integrity. I wasn't sure if he believed his own lie or just didn't care. I asked about the flight path, the radar logs, the sensor fade, all of it gone, rewritten like I had never taken off. He didn't raise his voice. He just reminded me that legacies could be fragile. When I didn't respond, he dismissed me with a nod. Like I was a footnote in someone else's meeting. I left the room without speaking, but my hands were clenched the whole way down the hallway. That night, I accessed the backup server. Quiet, careful, precise. I pulled the original data and buried it under a new encryption string. S code. The S stood for Spectre, or maybe for silence. I didn't even label it with my name. The next morning, I filed into the team photo for the radar division. My father stood at the center, beaming, arms folded. I was 3 rows back, unlisted in the summary. I thought I'd feel rage. Instead, I felt cold, focused. If no one was going to write my name into the story, I'd write it myself. Not in press releases, in code. In systems that would only function if my hand had touched them. They wanted a ghost, so I gave them one. One line of code buried too deep to erase. One legacy wrapped in silence. Liam had always been the one with the easy path. He looked like our father. Spoke like him, too. People listened when he walked into a room. Assuming confidence meant competence. But a few months after he joined the Spectre X program, things started bothering him. He noticed that the telemetry from the earliest test didn't match the timeline in the official records. A 6-minute gap, no pilot ID, just data that didn't add up. He brought it up casually during a briefing, and someone brushed it off. Early sim. Glitched file. Not important, but it stuck with him. The pattern, the numbers. They weren't just missing. They were familiar. Late one night, he stayed behind and pulled the logs again. This time, he didn't just glance. He studied them line by line. The flight path, the correction maneuvers, the micro adjustments in pitch. It reminded him of something he couldn't place. That's when he remembered. Years ago, I watched Ava on a civilian sim rig during a visit. Her hands were calm. Her inputs are smooth. The same quiet control. Like the aircraft responded before she moved. The next day, he found me in the hangar. I was logging updates on a diagnostics console when he walked in. No bravado. Just a question. Did you ever fly the first Spectre test? I didn't answer at first. Just stared at the screen until he spoke again. Because whoever did, they didn't flinch once in turbulence. I've only seen one other person fly like that. I turned, slow and steady. What would you do if it were me? He looked away for a second. Not out of shame, but hesitation. I'd want to know why it was covered up. It wasn't much, but it wasn't denial either, and that was new. He started helping without saying he was helping. Quiet checks on system files. Asking questions at meetings that nudged people toward the truth without setting off alarms. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something softer. Like respect. He never apologized, but I could see it in the way he looked at me after that. Not like a sister to ignore, but like a pilot who earned her place in the sky. For the first time, Liam wasn't the chosen one blindly following orders. He was someone standing in the gray, trying to figure out what legacy really meant. And maybe that was harder than being the favorite. Maybe it meant he finally saw me, not as a shadow, but as a signal worth chasing. The ballroom glowed with polished brass and flattery. Crystal lights scattered across plaques, medals, and champagne flutes. A banner hung over the stage, bold and proud. Spectre X, a new era. My father stood at the podium, his voice smooth as always. He spoke of honor, precision, and the Morgan legacy. When he said Liam's name, the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, the tribute video queued up behind him. Footage of a flight test filled the giant screen. I sat in the back, quiet, unnoticed. The video rolled. Familiar angles. My maneuvers. But labeled with Liam's call sign. I held my breath. Then, it happened. The HUD data in the corner began to shift. Altitude. Velocity. Aircraft ID. All updates are in real time. One by one, new lines appeared. Original metadata syncing from the source code I'd buried years ago. The screen flickered. Then a new line pulsed to life, in bold white. Pilot. E. Morgan. Not Liam. Me. The room stilled like a vacuum had opened. My father froze mid-sentence. Liam stared at the screen, his jaw slack. Conversations stopped. Glasses paused mid-air. Someone gasped. General Lawson narrowed his eyes. Whispers rose in waves. That wasn't a sim. She flew that. That's her data. The truth unspooled across the LED wall. Line by line. Undeniable. My father tried to speak, but the mic crackled. He looked at me from across the room, his face pale. Jaw locked. General Lawson stood. Colonel Morgan, care to explain this? Silence answered. Then a voice broke through from near the aisle. I was on comms that day. She went dark for 6 minutes. No one else flew that bird. It was Captain Rayner. Retired, but still sharp. His words landed like a gavel. The gala shifted. Stiff, backs softened. Heads turned toward me. I didn't rise. I didn't wave. I just looked straight ahead, steady, as the room recalibrated around the truth. My truth, finally cleared for takeoff. General Lawson stepped forward, eyes fixed on the data still streaming across the screen. That flight log wasn't simulated. The pilot record was manually removed. The name on this file is real. His voice didn't waver. Colonel Morgan didn't speak. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the microphone, then stopped. The weight of silence settled over him like armor cracking. One by one, people began to rise. An engineer in the front, a junior officer near the exit. Then more. They turned toward me. Some nodded, some saluted. The shift was quiet but undeniable. Even Liam stood. No hesitation this time. He looked straight at me, then lifted his hand in a crisp salute. It was clean, respectful, earned. I rose slowly, not in triumph, but in truth. For the first time, I felt no need to prove anything. I had already flown through the storm. Colonel Morgan stayed seated. His face had gone rigid. He didn't try to argue. He didn't defend the lie. He simply watched as the room he once commanded turned its respect toward someone else. I held my own salute, not for him, but for every person in that room who finally saw me. No medals, no titles, just recognition. When the applause came, it wasn't loud. It was quiet, measured, like wind passing over wings, the sound of honor settling into place. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood still, balanced, and in that moment, I didn't need his validation. I had built my own altitude. The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet. My father stood near the service exit, hands folded behind his back. For a second, I thought he might turn and walk away. He didn't. He looked at me, not like a superior, not even like a parent, just a man holding something he had carried too long. I deleted your file, he said. Told myself I was protecting your future, but I was only protecting my pride. I nodded once. No anger, just recognition. The words were heavy, but they didn't crush me. I know, I said. And I carried it anyway. Not because you asked me to, but because I learned how to carry what mattered. He didn't flinch, but something in his posture shifted. Softer, smaller. I thought control meant strength, he said quietly. For you, maybe it did, I said. But for me, discipline isn't about control anymore. It's about clarity, about knowing who I am, even when no one else does. He looked at the floor, then at me again. You were always better than I let you be. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I let the silence do what it needed to do. We didn't hug. There were no tears. Just two people, finally telling the truth out loud. He stepped back, gave a small nod. Not a salute. Not permission. Just space. Then he turned and walked into the dark hallway. I stood there for a long moment. No medals in hand. No spotlight. Just breathe. Even. Free. Some truths don't need applause. They just need air. A year later, the sky above Nevada was wide and clean, the kind of blue that made you believe in second chances. The new flight center gleamed in the morning sunday. Gold letters stretched across the building's front. Morgan Aeronautics Institute. Inside the auditorium, uniforms lined every row. Pilots, engineers, cadets. My name was called. I walked to the podium without hesitation. I saw my father in the second row. He didn't look proud. He looked present. When I turned toward the audience, both he and Liam rose. They saluted. No cameras prompted them. No applause guided it. They just did it. I returned the gesture. Then I spoke. Discipline isn't about perfection, I said. It's about honesty under pressure. About knowing what to hold on to and what to finally release. No one moved. They didn't need to. The silence held more weight than noise ever could. I stepped down from the stage as the applause followed, soft and full. Outside, sunlight spread across the runway. The latest Spectre jet rolled out, sleek and ready. I stood by the hangar window, hand on the glass. The jet climbed slowly at first, then lifted higher. The light hit its wings, just right. For a second, it shimmered like a memory in motion. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pull of gravity. I felt flight. Real. Earned. Mine. Legacy, I realized, isn't something you inherit. It's something you rise above. And I had.